Story number 1. The Old Man Across the Street. This might look like a normal and innocent picture, but there's a dark tale hiding behind it. I was around 6 or 7 years old when this story took place. My mother worked a pretty hectic job after my father left us. I was an only child and she couldn't afford to send me to school, which meant I mostly stayed at home all by myself. The only time I got to hang out or play with other kids was when my mom took me to the park. We lived in a large block of flats, and it was only a short walk away from the park. A lot of other families lived in the block with us, and they took their children there too. It was a pretty welcoming community, as far as I can remember. So, whenever my mother got home from work, we'd walk down the street to the park. She was usually really tired after working all day. I knew she worked hard, but being a kid, all I cared about was playing with the other kids. While at the park, she trusted the other families enough to watch me, along with the other kids, and she'd close her eyes for a moment. The one day, my mother got home from work, and she really didn't feel well. Being my normal self, I didn't really care. I was used to going down to the park, so that's what I wanted to do. My mother went to lie down for a moment, and promised she'd take me to the park afterwards, but that wasn't soon enough for me. Once she'd fallen asleep, I decided to go to the park myself. I knew where she kept the keys, and I'd walked to the park almost every day for more than a year. It wasn't that difficult. Now that I'm all grown up, I can fully understand just how dangerous this actually was. Surprisingly, no one seemed that confused by the fact that I was walking down the road all by myself. I got a few strange looks, but no one really seemed concerned. I made it all the way to the park before someone finally stopped me. It was a lady I knew and had seen at the park before. She had 2 sons that I often played with on the big slide. I can't really remember how, but I managed to convince her that my mother knew I was there. She took it upon herself to watch me while I played, since I did end up playing on the slide again with her sons. Now, as you can see it in the picture, the slide was really high. At some point, one of her sons fell from near the top of the slide. He wasn't badly hurt, but he couldn't stop crying, and his knee was bleeding. This took his mother's full attention away from me, and her other son was trying to comfort his brother rather than play with me. I decided to move to the climbing pyramid beside the slide, and I climbed to the top. I was by myself, and now that I think about it, I was kind of hidden from the bench where the mother and her sons were sitting. It was only after I got to the top of the pyramid that I saw the old man standing across the street. He was wearing a long black coat that covered his whole body down to his ankles, despite the hot weather. He also wore a black, wide-brimmed hat and used a wooden cane to lean on. Now, remember, I'm only around 6 or 7 years old when this happened. So, when I saw this old man, I didn't think much of it, but he was watching me. Every time I looked over at him, he would be staring directly at me. I couldn't see his face because it was hidden under the hat. I remember his cane, though. It was smooth wood that shined slightly. I forgot about the old man and continued playing. Eventually, I got bored. I went to the mother who'd been watching me and let her know I'd be going home. At this point, the only thing on my mind was to get home and have a snack. The first thing I noticed was a soft clicking sound following behind me. I didn't think about it at first. It was just a clicking sound. After a while, when the clicking sound was constantly following right behind, I became curious of what it was. I looked behind me, and that was when I spotted the same old man walking a few feet behind me. The clicking sound was his cane slamming against the sidewalk as he walked after me. I only glanced at him for a second. I looked forward again. It was at this point that I started feeling scared. I'd never seen him before, and by this point my mother had already taught me everything I needed to know about strangers. I carried on walking, since I was only a few minutes away from my apartment block. The clicking sound got louder behind me. I glanced around again, and the old man was closer this time, and walking a little faster. I started to feel scared now, but I didn't know what to do. I looked over my shoulder one last time, and his hand was stretched out as he was reaching out for me. I screamed and ran for it. I ran all the way to my apartment block and crashed through the front door to my apartment. This, of course, woke my mother up. She was angry, that much is obvious, but I still explained everything to her. She ended up going outside by herself to look for the man, but she didn't find anything. She got a neighbor involved. I remember sitting on my bed after being sent to my room and listening to them discussing getting the police involved. I don't really know what came of it since I'm a bit too scared to ask my mother about it, but that day terrified me. We still went to the park after that, and although it looks run down in the picture, it's still there. I never really enjoyed it as much after that day. Story number 2. A close encounter. This picture tells a lot of stories, although you wouldn't know just by looking at it. There's not a lot going on, but if you look closely enough, you'll notice a few strange things. One thing you'll notice is some girls running away from something unseen. Another thing you'll notice is the car parked directly in front of the store on the corner. Now, on the day this picture was taken, I was inside the corner store. I hadn't been there before. I was just passing the area, and since it was such a hot day, I decided to go in and buy myself a drink. Now, the corner store is nothing special. It's small and has very little options. There was water, milkshakes, and some sodas. It didn't take me long to decide on what I was going to buy, but I ended up spending the next 3 hours in that store. I was at the very back of the store going through the fridges when I heard a car pull up in front of the store. I'm a mechanic, and the car's engine desperately needed a tuning, so it would have been impossible for me not to hear it. As I was reaching into the fridge for my soda, I heard the car door slam shut. What followed was a series of shouting and yelling. I ducked down. I couldn't tell what they were saying because it was in Spanish or something, but the anger in their voice was enough to freak me out. I hid behind one of the few metal shelves and peeked over. A man had stomped into the store and was yelling at the man behind the counter. I figured the man behind the counter was the store's owner, which is the case with most of the small stores in my area. Like I said, I didn't know what they were talking about, but both of them were yelling pretty loudly and they were really angry. I put the drink on the floor and tried to make my way to the exit. I didn't know what was going to happen. It seemed like the best idea would be to sneak out and let these guys have their argument. I didn't get anywhere near the exit when I heard a loud bang. Now, I've never heard a gunshot before, outside of movies and that, but on that day it was hard to mistake the loud bang for anything else. There's a moment where you go into fight or flight mode, but my body seemed to be stuck in between the two. I froze. I was hidden behind a metal shelf and dropped to the floor. Everything that happened out of that was mostly a blur. There was a lot of screaming from outside the store, and the yelling from the man behind the counter got a little less angry and a lot more scared. The man who stomped into the store kept yelling. He was even angrier. I stayed crouched on the floor with my hands over my head and waited for it all to be over. I heard a second gunshot, and the man behind the counter had stopped yelling. In that moment, I imagined him lying dead on the floor. I started crying, which I'm sure anyone else would have done. The next sound I heard was the car door slamming shut and the engine revving to life. The car drove away, and then there was silence for what seemed like the longest time. I stayed on the floor. I was too scared to move or even breathe. It wasn't long until I heard sirens in the distance. Someone had called the police. After a while, I realized that I also could have called the police. I just froze. I won't bore you with what happened after the police got to the store. I will tell you that the man behind the counter wasn't shot. The man with the gun just fired 2 gunshots into the roof to scare the man. I have no idea why they had the argument since I got out of there as soon as I was able to, and I didn't stick around to ask any questions. You can't imagine how terrifying it is to hear a gunshot go off and to think to yourself that someone right by you might be dead. I'd never felt more terrified in my life. Story number 3. Lock the doors. This is a picture of the neighborhood I grew up in. My family was constantly moving from one state to the next due to my dad's job. We never really stayed in one place for very long, but when we came to this neighborhood, we stayed for a little longer. It seemed like our days of moving around were over. I managed to make some friends at school, which is something I never really tried to do because we moved around so much. This picture was taken the weekend I had a few of my friends over. It was a nice day, so we were hanging out by the pool for most of the time. Around lunchtime, we played some video games. We didn't have a lot of food in the house, since my mom wasn't used to me bringing friends over. She went out for a while to get some food for us. Now, I was around 15 years old, so being home alone wasn't a rare occurrence, but it still felt pretty cool. We put some music on and cranked the speakers up. It got hot again, so we headed back out to the pool, leaving the doors wide open so we could hear the music playing inside. Now, the music was so loud that we could barely hear anything else. We were also screaming and yelling. There was so much going on at the time that I was a little confused at first when I saw someone walking around inside the house. I was at the far edge of the pool. The sliding door leading to the living room was wide open. I jumped into the pool, and as I was falling into the water, I spotted a man walking through my living room. As the water engulfed me, I froze for a moment. It wasn't my dad, since he was still at work. I didn't get a good look at him, but he was also a lot taller and skinnier than my father. I was a bit confused, but I knew that I saw someone. I kicked against the bottom of the pool and shot towards the surface. The moment my head popped out of the water, I looked towards my living room. Whoever I saw was now gone. I quickly swam to the edge of the pool and pulled myself out. My friends didn't understand what was going on, but I rushed into the house and turned the music off. I had a look around, but I couldn't find anyone. I went to the front door and realized that my mom hadn't locked it when she left. My friends were still outside by the pool. I could hear them splashing in the water and running around. Then I heard thuds coming from the stairs. I turned around just in time to see a face peeking at me from behind the corner of the base of the stairs. As I looked around, the face pulled back and disappeared behind the wall. I rushed forward. I thought that one of my friends was messing with me and waiting to jump out at me when I walked past. I raced towards them, but as I got to the base of the stairs, I came face to face with a man I'd never seen before. He was the man in the picture. He was twice as tall as I was and towered over me. The sneer on his face was so sinister that it sent chills up and down my spine. I glanced down at his hand, and he was holding a chainsaw. I let out a yell and ran back towards my friends. They thought I was playing around at first, but then they saw the man as well. We all ran to the other side of the pool and started helping each other climb over the fence. We jumped into the neighbor's garden and began banging on their sliding door. They were obviously a bit confused to find a group of teenage boys in their swimming trunks, still wet and screaming for help. We were all so spooked that we barely managed to explain what was happening. Our neighbors called the police, and it was quite the scene that my mom came home to. The man was gone by the time the police searched the house. None of us were hurt, but we were freaked out to the point that none of my friends wanted to hang out at my house again after that. I don't think my mom has ever forgiven herself for not locking the door that day.